So the way I think about the European Union is that it's a bit like a mirage. From far away, it seems like something very clear. Seen from London, from Warsaw, from Paris, from Berlin. It has its own buildings, its own institutions, it has its own laws. But when you get a little bit closer, like any mirage, it starts to shimmer. And eventually, when you get really close, when you get to the heart of Brussels, it somehow seems to disappear altogether. And what you actually find are your own leaders, your own Prime Minister, David Cameron, Angela Merkel, François Hollande, Matteo Renzi, and all of these European leaders together making decisions. You find your own officials who've travelled from London to Brussels, making decisions with lots of other officials from other European countries. So it's really governments and their officials that rule Europe. If you ask somebody working within the European Commission, they will probably tell you that the European Union is for consumers. The single market is very large. There are 500 million consumers in it. Businesses that buy and sell things in the single market are obliged to be very competitive. And the idea is that brings down prices and makes things better for us as consumers. If you ask somebody who works in the European Central Bank, based in Frankfurt, they will tell you that the EU is really about achieving price stability in Europe. And price stability creates economic stability and allows businesses to make better decisions. Overall, trying to sum up, I would say that the European Union is for its member states, its governments. And we live in an age where governments don't believe that they can go it alone. They don't believe that they can run their own countries without having to do things together with other countries. And so the European Union is a place that provides mutual assistance for governments in ruling their societies, not alone, but together.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to talk about the rise of conservatism. So Alabama, where I went to high school, is a pretty conservative
state. There are two main
state.
advantages of being in the European Union. One, I think, is to do with the single market. There is no doubt that the single market is very large. It's a very diverse place. It's probably the case that as a consumer, the kind of variety that you find in the supermarket, so in terms of the kinds of food that you can buy, that variety comes from the ease with which trade takes place in the single market. So I think that's an important advantage. The second one, I think, is that we live in an age where international affairs is very important, where being able to take part in big international meetings is very important, being able to negotiate at the international level is important. And the European Union together, as a bloc of 28 member states, probably has more influence than any individual member state on its own. And so from the perspective of foreign affairs, it can give, I think, especially the small member states, countries like Austria, Ireland, Slovenia, it gives them much more clout in international affairs than they'd have otherwise. So I think there are probably a couple of important disadvantages. The first one is that the European Union, undeniably, I think, is quite a secretive organization. It's quite difficult to get access to the decisions that are being made. When our heads of state come together in Brussels and have these important crisis meetings, there is no journalist inside. There's nobody reporting on what's said in those meetings and the decisions that are made. And so it depends on the word of our leaders. Now, from the perspective of members of the public, of citizens, that I think is an important downside and does ask some deep questions about the quality of democracy at the European level. The second disadvantage, I think, is that the single market has many advantages, but one disadvantage is that because it's so big, the standards are set for the single market as a whole. And so individual governments in the past, they were able to decide on questions of public safety, for instance. They were able to decide where the boundary lies between private activity and public activity. Today, those decisions are essentially taken by the European Court of Justice, and governments are obliged to respect the decisions made by that court. And that, again, I think has some implications for democracy and also for the ability of individual countries to really manage their own economic and social affairs properly. It's often said that the biggest accomplishment of the European Union is that it's brought peace to the European continent after the terrible two world wars of the first half of the 20th century. I explain, I think, in the book that the historical record suggests that the truth is rather different. Peace in Western Europe came largely as a result of the economic boom that broke out in the early 50s into the 1960s. So I would say that the European Union is an outcome of peace rather than a cause of peace. I think, in my view, the main accomplishment of the European Union is that it has given us an idea of something called Europe. Many people across different countries in Europe associate the European Union with some sort of coming together, some sort of solidarity amongst European peoples. We may have many disagreements about whether or not we think that the European Union successfully embodies that ideal, and many of its critics don't think it does, but that nevertheless provides us with a standard against which we can assess projects of European unity. And that standard, I think, is one that's, that we should welcome.
The European budget is 2% of all the national budget. The biggest contribution that the EU can do is actually not through the amount of money it gives to the countries, but into what it puts the money. The impact of the pandemic on Europe's economy was huge. The GDP dropped by 7.4% across the EU, but the differences between the countries are really, really big. So in Italy, Portugal, and Spain, this was close to 10%. Germany, it was rather 5%, whereas in Sweden, Ireland, or even in Poland, it was between 2 and 4%. The youngest were hit very, very badly. The low skilled, the low wage, people in non-standard work, the self-employed, and also another factor for differences is that the low-income countries have much less space and possibility to compensate for the social impact of the pandemic.
In December 2020, the European Union agreed an unprecedented package for EU finances, comprising the traditional long-term budget of the European Union and a new temporary recovery instrument, Next Generation EU. This means that in this period, 2021-2023, we are adding to 3 traditional annual budgets of the European Union the equivalent of 5 other annual budgets. That's a significant amount of money.
The question is really how countries will absorb this. And this is where I would say that EU policies are not only very important in terms of having a budget, but they are also very important in terms of helping, if possible, the quality of the spending. Quality of the spending is really that the money is really going where it is necessary. So it has to go to the workers, to the vulnerable, so that there is really investment into education, into health, into building public institutions, having better public finance system.
Following the 2008 global financial crisis, only a fraction of fiscal spending across the world improved sustainability. The EU has designed its new recovery instrument in a different way, focusing it on the challenges and opportunities of the green and digital transitions, creating new jobs. We do not want only to recover, but we want also to make our economies and societies better, stronger, and fitter for the future.
The budget, as other policy tools like governance tools and policy objectives, can incentivize change in the member states. So it's very, very important how they impact the different systems. And this is why I think governance and institutions are as important as the budget itself. So the EU is actually an engine that can help experimentation, innovation, and transformation if the tools, including the budget of the EU, are used in a good way.
So you can see the focus there on the member states, the member states, the member states, the quality of the money that is being spent, how it is being spent. The effectiveness of the money depends upon the member states, the administrative capacities of the member states, the politics of the member states. The entire theme of this course, the member states, that $750 billion is being allocated by the European Union to the member states for the member states to spend. The member states have to do most of the work in deciding and implementing the allocation of those funds. So that's why we are studying the member states. And since that video came out, which is by the European Parliament, of course, the news reports highlight how the new Prime Minister of Italy is Mario Draghi. And Mario Draghi was the president of the European Central Bank during the financial crisis that began in 2009, 2010. And he became Prime Minister of Italy just several weeks ago. And to facilitate effectiveness in Italy spending the money from the European Union Recovery Fund, he has hired McKinsey. McKinsey is a famous corporation in the United States. McKinsey is a famous corporation that advises organizations, for-profit and non-for-profit. It has a prestigious reputation as being the most effective consultancy, maybe the most effective consultancy organization in the world. So again, advising the Italian government how to be effective in Italy spending the money so it's not wasted through corruption, through incompetence, through inefficiency. And that means really understanding what needs to happen in Italy for something to be done effectively in Italy. And that means understanding Italy or France or Greece, all of the member states. Okay, so that's a good introduction. So let me go back to the stop share and go back to, see, somebody's got a chat. Who's it? Okay. Attendance. Thank you. Yes, we have to do attendance. So let's go to Cyber Campus and we click on the course and we go to attendance and we go to smart attendance, and your smart attendance number is 762. 762 is your smart attendance number, 762. Okay, so I'll let that run. And onward to, in our short class today, more discussion of the member states. And okay, so let me open up the notes and okay, Bickerton. So you saw Mr. Bickerton, Professor Bickerton there at the beginning of the 10-minute presentation before we officially started class. And so where did we stop last time? So I think we stopped here. I think we stopped, okay, so that we find that the member states have become more important. The member state governments of the European Union have become empowered, have become more powerful as a result of European integration, rather than this image that we have of somehow European Union becoming a United States of Europe, and the states of Europe becoming just weaker and weaker and becoming provinces like the United States of America. The states of Ohio, California, Texas are really just provinces of the national government. That somehow we imagine that would happen in European integration over the years and decades, and that's not true. That's not what is happening. In fact, we see the member states becoming more powerful, more important in the European Union because of the need to coordinate, collaborate, and communicate among the centers of power in Europe. There needs to be an effective state government in Italy, in Greece, in Spain, in Poland, in all of the member states, which means they have to become more effective in overseeing, in monitoring, in gathering data information about their societies, about what is going on in their societies. So we see that European immigration since the early 1950s has strengthened the role of the nation state in Europe, strengthened the role of the nation state in Europe, not made it weaker. So again, we highlighted here that yeah, okay. I think we stopped. Okay. Yeah. And the European Union institutions like the European Commission, the European Parliament, they are not in a zero-sum competition with the member states. Typically, the member states utilize the European Union institutions to get what they want, and the officials within the European Union institutions like the European Commission and the bureaucrats working in the Council of Ministers, they also utilize the the European Union institutions to pursue their ends and objectives. And so we have something more sophisticated emerging than viewing the European Union weakening the member states. They're utilizing all of these officials, these private actors, including government officials, utilize all of these new institutions at the supranational European level, at the member state level, and also at the regional and local level, as they all become more active players in the European Union governance system to create coalitions and allies and networks to pursue their objectives in a process of multi-layered European governance, a European governance system that has multiple layers within it. Okay, so the European Union's complex multi-level arrangement, the member states exist alongside a great number of other political actors. And I have to share the screen. And I wasn't doing that. Okay, so yeah, screen sharing. For example, within the European Union institutions, alongside the government of the member states, they're official representatives of the regions. So the regions within the member states have official government, regional government offices in Brussels to represent the regions of Germany, for example. Like there are 16 different Länders or states of the German Federation. Each of those Länder, each of those states has an official representative office in Brussels. Bavaria, for example, is one of those states. The Catalans in Catalonia, autonomous region of Spain, they have an office in Brussels, and they intensely emphasize the importance of their identity as autonomous regions in Spain or autonomous regions in Germany through the European Union to express themselves. Sometimes perhaps going too far. Some who are skeptical of the European Union, nationalists, like, for example, you might find, particularly, for example, in the Spanish army, in the Spanish military, are suspicious about European integration because they do view Europe as a zero-sum relationship to the member states. They are worried, those nationalists in the Spanish military, for example, that Catalonia has been encouraged to dream a dangerous dream of independence from Spain because Catalonia can become sovereign within the European Union as a bigger entity, and Catalonia will be able to benefit within the broader European Union single market. And even though it's only a population of 7 million people, it doesn't need the rest of Spain to have a big market to export its products because Catalonia is richer than the rest of Spain. Catalonia has higher income than the rest of Spain. They don't need Spain. They think they have access to the entire European Union market for their exports. And plus, with 70 years of peace since the end of World War II and the start of the creation of the European Union, they don't think they need to be defended by an army from any threat. And with 7 million people, it's a small country, so they're not thinking in those traditional national sovereignty terms. So some could argue that the European Union has encouraged Catalan nationalism. It has encouraged Scottish nationalism. It has encouraged people to dream dreams that they might not have dreamed in a world in which states were more intense relationship with each other and in more intense conflicts with each other that existed until the end of World War II. Keep in mind, again, the member states and their tens, hundreds, millions of people that work within the member state governments of the 27 member states, they are on the front line of actually implementing the European Union policies. There's only I think, about 25,000 people that work in the European Union bureaucracy as bureaucrats working for the European Union. That's not even the size of the Seoul government of the city of Seoul, I would bet. I'm not certain on that, but the standard view is, for example, they say that the bureaucracy of the European Union itself is about the same size as the bureaucracy of the city of Paris. That's it. Right? So the member states, they are the critical players in terms of carrying out European Union policies that the European Union leaders decide, but then they leave it to the Italian state, the German state, the French state, the Polish state, the Bulgarian state, the Greek state to actually do what they're directed to do. And they may or not be able to do it, some more effectively than others. Italy has a relatively poor reputation, right? Which was one of the reasons why Matteo Renzi in the Italian left party undercut the previous prime minister under Conte, because he said, of course, probably self-servingly, that Conte, the prime minister, was not coming up with an effective, creative way to be prepared to take that money from the European Union Recovery Fund and spend it effectively in Europe, spend it effectively in Italy, spend it effectively in Italy to recover from the pandemic. So that was his justification for bringing the government down, causing the government to fall. And then Mario Draghi has just been elected or chosen to be the prime minister of Italy. And he brought in McKinsey, right? In Brussels, there are about 30,000 lobbyists work. So they're also, these are private people, these are private and public officials who represent corporations, the state governments, the lenders, as I mentioned, all lobbying the European Parliament, the European Commission, the Council of Ministers of the European Union. Still, the member states tend to dominate the policymaking process of the European Union. European officials are however, are the focus of popular perceptions of the European Union, even though it's still, like I said, a small staff. But if you're a politician in Italy or Greece or Poland, you are thinking about winning elections. You want to win elections. And as I said previously in other classes, right, you cannot understand public opinion, including voter behavior, unless you understand nationalism. And in nation states like Poland and in Bulgaria and in Greece and in France and in Italy, the typical citizen of those countries are nationalists. And so they're concerned about the sovereignty, perceived threats or no, factual or fake. They pretend to perceive threats to the sovereignty of the nation from other nations and other forces. And if you're a politician who must win elections, you want to appeal to those people. So they're always castigating the European Union bureaucracy. They often talk in false stereotypical terms about how European bureaucrats are dominating us, even though there's only 25,000 of them. It's a very small fraction of the size of the workforce of the US federal government, for example. But it is still influential. I mean, the people that go work for the European Union tend to be the best and the brightest. The people that tend to work for the European Union go through a rigorous process of selection, and they are very, very motivated, and they are very influential because of their skill, and they work. These 25,000 people work hand in glove with officials that are sent from the Spanish or Italian or Greek or French or German or Bulgarian or Polish or governments. All of those governments, they send their own individual civil servants to work temporarily in Brussels alongside those people. But they still work for the Polish government or the Italian government or the Greek government, even though the Greek government might send them to go work in Brussels for 6 months or a year or longer. They're working alongside these people, right? So the Commission, the European Commission, legally has a monopoly on the right of a formal proposal of legislation in designated policy areas in the formal EU policymaking process. But the member states give these powers to the Commission. They delegate these powers to the Commission. And of course, the Commission has the sole legal right to propose legislation, to write down legislation proposed, and they talk to the member states, and the Commission talks to the governments of the member states, it talks to the members of the European Parliament, and it comes up with a draft proposal. And then when it submits the draft proposal, that is its formal power, to submit the draft proposal, to begin officially debating and discussing and amending and possibly approving that draft legislation. But of course, the Commission is only going to do what the member states want it to do. And they're going to make sure that there is as much support for anything they propose as they can get before they propose it, all right? So it's not like they're going to ever propose something that has little support. They always are consulting. They're always talking, and communicating. At all levels, this is the Bickerton notes from Bickerton chapter 2, right? So you remember we were showing Bickerton, he's a young guy there. At all levels of EU negotiations and policymaking, the EU member states engage, right? Formally and officially, the European Union treaties limit the role of the member states. The Council, the Council formations are when the Council of the Ministers, also officially called the Council of the European Union, meets, it has different formations. So when the agricultural ministers of the different member states meet together, that's one formation. When the interior ministers meet from the different member states, that's another formation. And then the European Council, as we said before, is the meeting of the heads of state and government. This is the most powerful, most important body in the European Union. And it meets at least twice every 6 months. Right? So at least, and almost always in Brussels. So that means President Macron of France and Angela Merkel of Germany and now Mario Draghi of Italy are all going at least twice every 6 months to Brussels to talk to each other. It was the 2009 Treaty of Lisbon that made the European Council a permanent institution, so relatively recently, right? And that's in response to these crises. That since the end of the Cold War, since the end of the Soviet Union, since the beginning of the war in Yugoslavia in the early 1990s, since the breakup of the Soviet Union, since the increasing violence in Ukraine and elsewhere, and then when the financial crisis, the need for the European Union to respond effectively and rapidly as possible, still not very rapidly, but as rapidly as possible to these escalating crises, meant that the member states' most powerful officials, the prime ministers and presidents, had to take the lead. And they have been taking the lead as sort of a collective presidency of the European Union. It has the European Council as the formal responsibility to decide the agenda for the European Union, the agenda that the European Council, the European Parliament all pay attention to about what are we going to do for the next 6 months? What are we going to focus on? What do we need to pass? And some of you know who've been involved in politics and student government, for example, if you set the agenda, you controlled 90% of the work, of the output of the process of making policy, if you set the agenda of what the different organizations are going to debate and discuss. Right? That's true anywhere. That's true in student government, and it's true at the European Union level as well. So the European Council issues minutes, issues statements, declarations, and those are the guidelines for everybody else to follow in the European Union in responding, for example, to the pandemic most recently. The European Council first emerged in 1974, or what became the European Council, basically dealing with crises. It was at that time that there was the Arab oil embargo on countries that were allied with Israel against the Arabs in the 1973 October War, and also the quadrupling in the price of oil made a major shock to the world economy, and the first oil shock of the 1970s. And then also the so-called threat of terrorism began to emerge. In 1970, we began to see Palestinian nationalists trying to gain attention to their claims that they're being oppressed and hurt by Zionism, and begin engaging in violent acts. And this was high profile, right? Hijacking planes. That's what I recall in the 1970s. What was the next passenger jet hijacked by somebody claiming to have a bomb or a gun? That's when the member state leaders of the European Economic Community, the European Community at the time, met to begin to talk about coming up with a common position of the European countries in regards to these challenges. And it was informal. It was informal. Like I said, it only became formal in 2009 in the Treaty of Lisbon. And then these meetings developed. You know, they began to be regularly scheduled and structured with an agenda. And now they officially created a permanent bureaucracy to support the European Council, and with the president of the European Council, who's really like a general secretary of the European Council, because but it's a permanent bureaucracy that's always preparing for these European Council meetings that are happening at least twice every 6 months. So the European Council serves as a crisis manager in chief. And again, it just highlights the importance of the European member states. And again, when we say European member states, we have to talk about the challenge of nationalism, because it's there and it's not going away. The European Council took the lead in responding to the Greek sovereign debt default threat when it emerged at crisis peak in 2015. The president of the European Council at the time was Donald Tusk, the former prime minister of Poland. Donald Tusk, who was the president of the European Council, like I said, sort of like a general secretary, he took the lead in mediating between Greece's creditors, including the banks and the governments, and the Greek government that lasted throughout the nights, right? So he had to be trusted, admired person who Angela Merkel and the French president and Italian prime minister and all of the leaders of Europe could trust to be discreet, share sensitive information, somebody that had high interpersonal skills, so to speak. Below the European Council is the Council of Ministers, and that's the agricultural ministers, the interior ministers, and so on. The ministers and national officials meet in the Council of Ministers, right? The Treaty of Rome from 1957 that set up the European Economic Community set up the Council of Ministers to strengthen the formal role of the member states in relationship to the high authority. That was the old name of what is today the European Commission, the high authority of the European Coal and Steel Community that began with the Treaty of Paris in 1951. The Council of Ministers, together with the European Parliament, have to agree to make and pass laws under the co-decision procedure to become European Union law. That is relatively recently, under the Treaty of Lisbon, it's called the ordinary legislative procedure, that the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament both have to agree on legislation to become law. But it applies only to certain policy areas. The Council of the European Union is still supreme in the area of EU foreign policy. When the European Union tries to act like a world power as the European Union, the European Parliament plays a more limited legal role. It's still the Council of the European Union playing a prominent role. And the European Council brings together, and the Council of Ministers brings together ministers from across member states with the ministers from one sector, like agriculture or other areas, meeting together as one of the so-called formation of the Council. And so, but again, these ministers, the agricultural ministers or the interior ministers, these are professional politicians. And most of the work in preparing for those meetings is done by civil servants. So when these agricultural ministers or interior ministers or cultural ministers fly into Brussels or come into Brussels for the meeting of the Council of the European Union, they sit down at their desks, at their chairs around the negotiating table, and their ministers present them with the agenda, like this is the agenda, and with their list of options that they need to choose from, A, B, or C, on each of these policy questions that may be before them. And so a lot of work is done by the member state governments, as well as the European Union institutions, in coming up with this nice short agenda of issues and possible solutions that the ministers must select from. And their job is to select one. And again, that means 90% of the work has already been done before the ministers arrive in Brussels. And it's done by the permanent representatives, the permanent ambassadors of Italy, Spain, Greece, France, Germany, Estonia, all the member states sitting in Brussels at their permanent representations. That's the name for it in English. They don't want to say embassies because they don't want to highlight that this is somehow foreign relations between the member states. They're the permanent representatives, but they're basically the ambassadors of the member states to the European Union. And they have an ambassador, a permanent representative, and an organization in Brussels who are there permanently, always talking to all the other permanent representations, as well as to the commissioners and the Commission bureaucracy and the European parliamentarians and the European Parliament bureaucracy to come up with do the hard work of coming up with the final agreement, as much work that can be done as possible, so that when the ministers, not to mention when the European prime ministers and presidents come to Brussels to meet, that basically they are presented with a limited choice of options, even a recommended option that it should be adopted. In fact, they are only really consulted if their political power is necessary. The political weight that they have in their countries is necessary to use to resolve an unresolvable dispute that those permanent officials in Brussels cannot themselves resolve. If they can decide themselves on something, they're not going to bother the ministers. Right? They only ask the ministers to resolve something when they can't resolve something. But most of the time, they do most of the work and they resolve most of the issues. Because everybody's too busy, right? If I'm a minister, only ask me my opinion if you need it. If you can solve that problem below me, solve it. Solve it. Only bring to me what you cannot solve if I'm a minister or prime minister or a president. Because there's always too much to do. Always. And we're always under pressure and crisis pressures if we're officials. So before these meetings, senior level officials, but below the level of ministers, meet and do most of the negotiating to ensure that when their ministers meet, they reach some sort of agreement on an issue put before them. So to get to this point, legislative work on a question or issue begins long before the Council of Ministers meets. National experts, I already mentioned, right, from each of the member states meet together in a total of about 300 different working groups. So these working groups, they involve all sorts of people, officials who work or employees of the European Union, professional European Union civil servants, as well as what's called seconded national civil servants from all of the member state governments, all working together in these working groups, talking, negotiating, communicating, going through procedures and processes to address questions. And then the committee just below the council consists of the permanent representatives, meaning the ambassadors of the member states, the European Union itself, meet just as often as the council do to do most of the final negotiating before the council meets. And if you want to study another foreign language and you want to pursue South Korea's ties with the European Union, study French as your next foreign language, because the acronym for this permanent representative body of meeting of the officials of the permanent representations of the different member states is COREPER in French. And there's COREPER 1 and COREPER 2. And these are the just below the level of the Council of Ministers meetings. And the more important one is COREPER 2. So I highlighted in Wikipedia. I shouldn't have done that. Let me see if I can go. So for example, all of the Wikipedia entries, here's the Committee of Permanent Representatives, and they highlight here COREPER. And so you can see how it works. You know, the Wikipedia, you can tell, right? A lot of organizations, including the European Union, as well as private companies, invest a lot of effort in making their Wikipedia entries look really nice. So you can tell that this is too nice. This is done by the European Union because people like me and you go look at Wikipedia for information. Hey, what is this Committee of Permanent Representatives? Well, there it is. Okay. So back to the notes, and I got a screen share again. And I'm rushing through the notes because there's just so much to cover here. This is a really good chapter. Chapter 2 is a really good chapter. The European Parliament is supposed to counterbalance the national governments, because the members of the European Parliament are directly elected to be within the European Parliament. They are not ministers elected nationally who then go and represent their national governments of the European Union. These people represent the peoples of the European Union, the Germans, the French, the Italians, directly, not through the governments, but directly through elections in Germany to elect representatives to the European Parliament, in Greece, in Estonia, in Latvia, in Bulgaria. It's an effort to try to emphasize the role of the individual European Union citizens in directly having representation, not indirectly through the governments, but directly as a citizen of the European Union, as well as a citizen of Italy and a citizen of Germany in the European Union institutions. And it's still kind of awkward in terms of the role of the European Parliament, because let's face it, the European Parliament, well, let's talk about the European Parliament. The member states in the form of the Council have to collaborate and compromise with the European Parliament. According to Bickerton, Christopher Bickerton, the EU member states play a central role. The ordinary legislative procedure, that's its official name since 2009, requires co-decision between the Parliament and the Council. So that's the name, the ordinary legislative procedure, and they put that in the treaty. Because they want to convince you and me and the citizens of Italy and the citizens of Hungary and of Czech Republic and Slovakia that this is ordinary. This is normal. This is democratic. This is good. This is, again, highlighting, again, I just always get this sense. I always get a sense that the European Union is struggling with nationalism, that this is what the European Parliament really is, equal to the member state governments of the European Union. And it's directly elected by the peoples of Europe. It's not representing the governments of Europe. It's representing the peoples directly through direct elections. And so it's supposedly equal to the Council in the ordinary legislative procedure. You like, yes, I like, you like, huh? You like being Europeans? Citizens of Italy, you like being Europeans? See, we have the ordinary legislative procedure, huh? Well, it didn't convince the British, obviously, since they had a referendum and they voted to leave. And again, the Commission proposes the legislation, but the Commission just consults with everybody to make sure that whatever they propose is likely to get adopted, even if it has to be amended. So, and they, again, communication, trialogues, like a dialogue. Dialogue is 2, trialogue is 3. The Commission, representatives of the Commission, representatives of the European Parliament, representatives of the Council of Ministers get together in a trialogue and talk to come up with a legislation that will pass. These meetings occur behind closed doors. In other words, they don't want the publics to know about them, because if people hear about what they're talking, they might generate sensitivities and cause political resistance and hostility, right? So, and that, again, contributes to this democratic deficit. But that's true everywhere. I mean, that's true in the Korean government, that's true in the American government. Politicians, and competing with each other, negotiate and talk privately with each other and don't tell everybody what they're talking about. I mean, that's the nature of policy making. So the co-repair permanent representatives, or perm reps, permanent representatives meet and negotiate with the European Parliament. Rapporteurs are like the representatives of the European Parliament. The Commission rarely intervenes directly, typically only to ensure that the negotiations stay focused on what the topic is, so they don't go off and go into other areas. So 1,500 trialogues were held between 2009 and 2014. And 85% of these trialogues produced early agreements, right? In the subsequent co-decision process, typically if they still can't agree, if the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers still can't agree after all these trialogues and all these discussions, and they're still debating and arguing and trying to amend, they might get together, and only 2% of these proposals come together in a conciliation process. And the conciliation process means the Council and the European Parliament send high-level representatives to try to resolve their differences one last time. Conciliation procedures, it's the official name, conciliation procedures, only occur when and if the Parliament and the Council cannot agree after a second reading of the proposed legislation. So a second reading means they've been amending the legislation, they've been trying to revise it, they make some changes and the changes upset somebody else, and then they make some other changes and then those changes upset somebody else. So they're not getting successful. They're not being successful in getting it through when they go into conciliation, and so sometimes it just doesn't work and the legislation isn't passed. But most of the time, something is passed. But it's complicated, lots of amendments, lots of changes, and the result is complicated legislation that everybody is kind of disappointed in. But that's democracy in a huge, complex organization involving 500 million people in the richest part of planet Earth, in the most diverse place in planet Earth, Europe. Co-decision, or the ordinary legislative procedure, has boosted the involvement of the Parliament, and so the question of dispute is whether the Parliament really competes with the member states as being representatives of the wills of the European citizens. Some people, of course, if you're in the European Parliament, you say, sure it does, yeah. But other people say, nah, the European Parliament still is kind of a second-tier actor. I mean, that Shepley professor slides I showed you last week, she said that during that presentation. Effective trilogues have made the European Union policy process smooth and efficient and increased the Parliament's institutional influence. That's true. But at the same time, the trilogues, which happen, privately behind closed doors, again, allow people to claim that the European Union is not fully allowing people to see what it's doing. Even the European Parliament is just basically a way by which to make it look democratic, but it's not really democratic, because the Parliament exercises influence primarily behind secrecy, behind closed doors. And that looks like how the permanent representatives work. Okay, so we only have like 12 minutes left in the class, in our short class, and so the rest of the material highlights how the member states are not equal in power, so they're not equal in influence. But we'll come back to these themes and topics throughout the rest of the semester. Even if we don't get to them today. And so I want to highlight how nationalism. Bickerton says the EU is likely to survive. I mean, Shepley, that professor I mentioned, whose slides, PowerPoint slides I showed you last class. I mean, I'm surprised at what she said. I mean, she said the European Union is in crisis, it's in danger. She predicted that Marine Le Pen is likely going to defeat Emmanuel Macron next year in elections in France. And she is a far-right Eurosceptic party that maybe she won't take France out of the European Union, but she's been criticizing the European Union as bad for France. So let's go on here. So, so let's open up this slide here. There's Catalonia. And so we go, let me open the screen share here. So here's Catalonia. You can tell Catalonia, somebody is a Catalan nationalist and produced a nice Wikipedia entry for, look how long this is on Catalonia, how the glory of Catalonia, oh, how proud of Catalonia. I mean, clearly this is shown that one can make the argument that Catalans are really benefited. Catalan nationalism has benefited from European integration because they don't think they need to be part of Spain to thrive and be secure because of European Union integration. And keep in mind that during the vicious Spanish Civil War of the 1930s, Franco, the fascist dictator, really targeted Catalan nationalism, right? And so there's a lot of resentment about the central government in Spain, and you can see the autonomous regions divided up here. They're referenced in the chapter on Spain in the textbook. Has European Union made nationalism stronger in Europe? Let's see here. What about we go back to those notes that here are, or Jean-Marie Le Pen. She's the leader of the Rally for the Republic. She is running, going to be the #1 challenger to Emmanuel Macron next year in France. And she is the daughter of Jean-Marie Le Pen, who founded this party when it was called the National Front. And he's still alive, but he's very old. So his daughter replaced him and expelled him from leadership of the party, although he's still part of the party. Again, a very nice Wikipedia entry for him. You can tell, written by a member, the National Front, and very honorary, very appealing to him. But his daughter is now the leader, and she has made built a political career attacking the European Union, as European Union is allowing too much immigration to France. And but this man, he emerged around French nationalism and the resentment and anger in France regarding the humiliations of France in the 20th century. He was a paratrooper in the Algerian War when Algeria was breaking away from France as part of the French Empire. Hundreds of thousands, according to the Algerians, 1.5 million Algerians were killed, and French paratroopers like him, they were notorious for the atrocities that they carried out. I don't know if he carried out atrocities, but French paratroopers were the elite military, the French military, trying to put down the nationalist rebellion. And the French lost. And they've been struggling with that ever since, like they've been struggling with their defeat in World War II and the resentment around. And of course, many of those people who worked for the French then immigrated to France in the Hakirs, the people that fought for the French against the Muslims in France. And so big migration of Algerian Muslims and others to France. And of course, there's this conflict in France between the political activists who are working for the defense of the rights of Muslims in France. And many of those people came after the Algerian War. And of course, many French people who had been living in Algeria for generations fled Algeria, given up their homes that they've lived in for many generations. So this nationalist resentment is emerging, and it's this time of rapid change. And of course, the Fifth Republic of France, formed under Charles de Gaulle, emerged out of the chaos of the Algerian War. Only Charles de Gaulle had the political capability and authority to mobilize the French to accept that they must leave Algeria. And that resentment, particularly in the midst of the discontent regarding the economic insecurities, and now exacerbated by the pandemic, are all the context of this this rise of nationalism in these countries. And so let me go back to any other slides. So we already covered that. And so and it's everywhere you see this happening. I mean, even the Americans, for example, in the January 6th attack on the US Congress, you saw people that were storming and occupying US Congress flying the South Vietnamese flag, the anti-communist South Vietnamese flag of South Vietnam. Again, focusing on perceived national humiliations of the past as symbols of expressions of nationalism today. And Marine Le Pen and the National Rally are all about that. They got its foundation in resentment about France being humiliated, the Algerian War, and then focusing on other sensitive topics like immigration and the that is now driving change in politics in France. So I was going to ask you to do an exercise, and so let's go to polling. Oh, I get sorry, we can't do polling. So in the individual sessions because of individual accounts. So and here you see, here's a report about. Let me see if I can share a screen here. And so you see here a report about the leader of Catalan independence movement. What's his name? Puigdemont. Has, after the Catalonian Assembly voted for independence from Spain in 2017, the leader of this push Charles Poudemont, fled to Belgium and Germany, countries in the European Union, to avoid going to jail. And then he got elected to the European Parliament. Is this what's supposed to happen in the European Union? And now the European Parliament has stripped away his parliamentary immunity. And now the Spanish government wants the other member states of the European Union to arrest him and send him back to Spain so he can go to jail, like his other conspirators who worked to push that legislation through the Catalonian embassy, right? So I was going to ask you, please respond to the following statement. Europeanization makes nationalism stronger in Europe, not weaker. Do you strongly agree, neutral, cannot decide, disagree, strongly disagree? And but we're running out of time. We should go instead now to our exercise, our debate. And so let me break you into breakout rooms. And so breakout rooms. And so, well, let's create 2 breakout rooms. So we go assign automatically and open all rooms. And so the topic is that we want to debate now is the topic in the make sure I'm sharing the screen again. To South Koreans, globalization is for the world what Europeanization is for Europe. So let me share screen and go here. So that's the debate topic. To South Koreans, globalization is for the world what Europeanization is for Europe. And so we go back to the stop share and breakout rooms. And so group 1, you are pro. Group 2, you are con. Okay, so join the groups, and in the 3 minute, in 1 minute, come up with a statement. The first person, Park Chung Hyun, come up with a pro statement, and In Hyuk Chun, come up with a con statement. Talk to each other. Okay, come up with a statement, and you have 1 minute to come up with a statement as to why you are pro. Group 1 and group 2. 1 minute to come up with a statement as to why you are con. So who's in there? We have Sungun So I only see Sungun in group 2. Room 2, you are con. Room 1, you are pro. Come up with a statement. You have 1 minute. Use your paragraphs that you wrote to formulate your ideas. The aim here is to give you some practice talking. Since I've done all the talking in this class, I want you to talk, and I want you to talk, not just me. So please, again, what happened? Somebody left. Sungun where'd you go? Oh. Okay, and so you've got 60 minutes to come up with 60 seconds to come up with a statement.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes.
Do we have to go to school next week, or
Yeah.
you're just having a Zoom class?
No, Monday we have class.
In the school?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
30 seconds. $15 seconds. $5 seconds. Okay, so Park Chung Hyun, what did your group come up with?
You start with pro, right, sir?
Yes.
So I mean, we barely had any time to talk about anything, but really, what we want to say is that Europeanization helped unify Europe in a certain way, and globalization, that's what the goal is with globalization as well. And plus, they both share the same weakness, which is that nationalism is the greatest weakness for them.
Okay, Sungun Khan.
So yeah, we really didn't have any time to talk, but personally, I was in the side of con, because I think Europeanization like kind of show, like as the time goes on, it shows how like lots of problems exist in like forming groups of like many countries. So that's why I think that's one of the reasons why United Kingdom, they left European Union, and like now the the candidate for the French presidency, she is kind of talking about it also.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of makes nationalism to act stronger.
Yeah.
And like for
Hey,
me,
there's not a
like,
concrete single answer to these questions. Good job. Okay, so the last thing you want to do now is have you vote on, and let's see if I can do this. So we go back to a vote, and here is the, okay, so please vote on this topic. And would you please vote, and see, I got a screen share, and make sure I screen share, and we go to, if I can find it here, and please vote on who won the debate, pro or con. There's 3, couple more. We have to close up the class. So this is participation. Please participate. This is how we can still vote on the Friday classes. So let's see who else is. Okay, so that's up to 6, and we're almost done. Everybody voted? So you think pro? Okay, all right. Well, that's where we'll stop today, and that will be it now. And I guess I will post the recording on the Cyber Campus. So see you on Monday. Okay.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Bye. It was fun.